The excavation team worked in silence, their breath misting in the cold, stagnant air of the underground chamber. Their headlamps cut through the darkness, illuminating ancient, dust-covered machinery, relics of a time long forgotten. They had been expecting old technology. Maybe weapons, maybe data cores, anything they could sell to the black market traders who thrived on the ruins of the once mighty Terran dominion. But this was something else. The structure at the center of the chamber was massive, its metallic surface untouched by time, still bearing the insignia of a long-extinct faction, Project Titanborn. "What the hell is this?" whispered Darnell, the team's engineer, brushing a gloved hand over the faded lettering. "A cryopod," answered Rhea, the group's leader. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled as she wiped away the dust from the viewing panel. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside the pod, a man lay still, massive, armored, and ancient. Not just any man. A warrior. This shouldn't be possible," she whispered. The pod's systems flickered to life. The deep hum of power returning to the chamber sent vibrations through the floor. Runes of old Terran script scrolled across the console. Auto revival sequence hiti. Shit. We didn't touch anything. Darnell panicked, backing away. Lights flashed. Hydraulic locks disengage. The temperature inside the pod rose rapidly as freezing gases vented in a rush of steam. And then, a hand slammed against the glass. The entire team jumped back, weapons drawn. The figure inside twitched, then moved. A hiss of air signaled the unlocking of the pod, and the cryo chamber snapped open with a deafening clang. The warrior fell forward, landing on one knee, his breathing ragged. His bare arms were corded with dense muscle, his skin marked with scars of ancient battles. He lifted his head, revealing ice-blue eyes that burned with unnatural intensity. He inhaled sharply, the sound more animal than human, like a machine restarting after centuries of disuse. Then his eyes focused and locked onto them. Rhea took a step back. They had just awakened something far beyond their understanding. The warrior's fist clenched, and in a deep, guttural voice, one that carried both authority and menace, he spoke for the first time in centuries. "Where am I?" No one moved. Then, outside the chamber, a distant explosion shook the ground. A new presence had arrived. The alien mercenaries hunting them had just found the ruin. And now, with the Titanborn awake, they were walking into something far deadlier than they had ever faced. Torian Graves rose to his full height and turned toward the sound of approaching enemies. His first battle in centuries was about to begin, and the galaxy had just made a terrible mistake. The ground trembled as another explosion rocked the ruins. Dust cascaded from the chamber ceiling, and the distant echoes of weapons fire sent a clear message. Whoever was coming wasn't here for salvage. Rhea barely had time to react before Torian Graves moved. The Titanborn exploded into motion, his muscles shifting like a battle-forged machine finally given purpose. His body, once frozen in time, now pulsed with raw, terrifying power. He took a single step forward, scanning his surroundings like a predator waking in a foreign jungle. His eyes locked onto Rhea. Who was coming? His voice was rough, like stone grinding against metal. Rhea snapped out of her shock. "Xel Zor Raiders. Mercenaries. We need to move now." Darnell was already scrambling to pack up equipment, but Torian ignored him. The Titanborn didn't retreat. A red warning light flashed on Rhea's wristpad. Motion detected. Multiple contacts. They were surrounded. A guttural alien voice boomed through the ruins. "Terran scavengers. You are trespassing on Dominion-claimed relics. Surrender, and you may yet serve in the slave pits." Rhea clenched her jaw. She had heard those words before. They were never true. Torian's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture shifted. The word Terran lingered in the air like an unspoken challenge. He turned toward the ruin's entrance, where flickering lights cast eerie shadows. The first enemy stepped into view. A Xelzor battle hunter, towering at nearly 8 feet, clad in dark metallic armor. Behind him, a squad of 6 more aliens, their reptilian features twisted in cruel amusement, raised their energy rifles. Their leader sneered. "Oh, what is this? A lost little human soldier." He tilted his head. "No weapons, no armor, no insignia. You must be." Torian moved before he could finish. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he was a blur. The first Xelzor never even had time to react. Torian's hand shot forward, gripping the alien's throat and lifting him off the ground with monstrous strength. The Xelzor gurgled, claws scrambling to break free. But Torian's grip was unyielding. Then, Shirai. Torian's hand twisted. The alien's neck snapped like dry wood. The body hit the ground before the others even processed what had happened. For one single moment, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. The Xelzor opened fire, blazing plasma bolts flooding the chamber. But Torian was already moving, weaving through the onslaught with inhuman speed. He reached the second enemy in 2 strides, ripping the rifle from his hands and caving his skull in with a single punch. The scavengers watched in awe. Torian wasn't just fighting. He was slaughtering them. The Titanborn had returned, and the galaxy was not ready for what came next. The cavern burned with the glow of plasma fire, but Torian moved like a phantom through the chaos. A Xelzor soldier turned his rifle toward him, mandibles clicking in a battle cry. Torian was faster. He caught the alien's wrist mid-motion, twisted, and the sickening pop of bone snapping echoed through the chamber. The Xelzor barely had time to scream before Torian drove his fist through his chest plate, yanking him off the ground and using his body as a shield against the next wave of plasma fire. The remaining Xelzor hesitated. They had expected scavengers, not a monster. Torian saw their hesitation. He grinned. He hurled the corpse at the nearest enemy, then surged forward. Faster than a charging beast, deadlier than a machine. His hands found another Xelzor's throat, lifting the alien with ease before slamming him into the ground so hard the stone cracked beneath the impact. 3 left. 1 raised a plasma rifle. Torian closed the distance in a blur, grabbing the barrel and twisting it backward before jamming it under the alien's jaw and pulling the trigger. 2 left. 1 tried to run. Torian wasn't having it. With inhuman strength, he grabbed a fallen rifle and hurled it like a spear. The weapon pierced the fleeing soldier's back, sending him sprawling to the ground with a dying gurgle. 1 left. The final Xelzor dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, eyes wide with terror. Please, we didn't know what you were." Torian stepped forward, towering over him. His eyes were ice cold, his face unreadable. "That was your first mistake," he said, and then he snapped the alien's neck. Silence. The fight was over before the scavengers could even react. Rhea stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. They had heard stories of the Titanborn, of their strength, their brutality. But this was something else. This was war made flesh. Torian turned to them, rolling his shoulders. "These weren't just mercenaries," he said, scanning the fallen enemies. "They were Xelzor Dominion scouts." He nudged a corpse with his boot. "They knew what was buried here, and now their superiors will know too." Darnell swallowed. "You mean more of them are coming?" Torian's expression darkened. "Not more. All of them." Rhea clenched her fists. The Xelzor would not let this go. Torian exhaled slowly. Then he cracked his knuckles. "Good. Let them come." The Titanborn was awake, and the galaxy would soon learn what that meant. The cavern was littered with corpses, the stink of burned flesh thick in the air. The only sound was the distant hum of failing machinery, struggling to maintain power in the ancient ruin. Rhea wiped sweat from her brow, her mind still racing. She had seen battles before, but this was something else. Torian Graves stood amidst the dead, calm and unshaken. He exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the darkness, listening for threats beyond what the others could perceive. Then he spoke. "More will come, and soon." Darnell cursed. "How soon?" Torian looked toward the chamber entrance. "They'll be mobilizing now. We have minutes at best." Rhea clenched her jaw. The XL Zor were relentless. If they sent an entire strike force, they wouldn't stand a chance. Not here, cornered underground. "We need to move." Torian didn't argue. Instead, he strode toward one of the fallen XL Zor, kneeling beside the body and tearing a gauntlet from its arm. The alien tech flickered weakly in his grip. "What are you doing?" Rhea asked. Torian's fingers moved with precise efficiency, manipulating the interface until the device lit up, accessing their battlenet. Rhea's eyes widened. "You can do that." Torian's lips curled slightly. "I was built for war. I know their encryption." The gauntlet flickered, alien text scrolling across its interface. Then, a transmission broke through. A deep, guttural voice. "Team Beta, report. Status on the excavation site." Rhea held her breath. If they didn't respond, the XL Zor would know something was wrong. Torian tilted his head slightly. Then, in perfect, guttural XL Zor dialect, he replied. "Scavengers neutralized. No further threats detected. Continuing search." The line went quiet. Then, "Understood. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound." The transmission cut out. Darnell paled. "Shit. They're coming anyway." Torian tossed the gauntlet aside. "I know." He turned to Rhea. "How well do you know these ruins?" Rhea blinked, then nodded. "Well enough." "Why?" Torian's blue eyes burned in the dim light. "Because we're not running. We're turning this place into a killing field." Darnell stared. "You're insane." Torian smirked. "No, I'm Titanborn." He turned to the ruins, already scanning for choke points, ambush zones, places to funnel the enemy into slaughter. The hunters were coming. But they were about to learn fear. Torian moved like a man who had done this before, because he had. Hundreds of times. His mind was already shaping the battlefield, turning the ruins into a trap-laden slaughterhouse. Every corridor, every collapsed structure, every broken support beam. A weapon waiting to be used. Rhea followed him as he surveyed the chamber, still struggling to process what she had seen. The XL Zor had been afraid of him. She had fought them before. They didn't fear humans, not anymore. But they feared him. This place was built for defense. Torian muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Ancient Terran stronghold. Sealed corridors. Kill zones. They'll funnel in, thinking they have us surrounded. That's when we'll break them. Darnell swallowed hard. Break them. There's a whole strike team coming. Torian turned to him, eyes cold. Not for long. Rhea exhaled. What do you need? Torian's grin was wolfish. Explosives, debris, anything to create choke points. The more we control their movement, the easier it is to butcher them. Darnell paled at the word butcher. Rhea didn't. She simply nodded. We don't have much, but we can rig some of their own weapons. They moved quickly. Darnell and Rhea set charges along the main entrance, a controlled collapse to block retreat and force the XL Zor down a single narrow corridor. Torian, meanwhile, gathered the fallen XL Zor's plasma weapons, pulling power cells, overloading them, and setting them as unstable traps. The aliens would see their own weapons and never suspect they were rigged to blow. Minutes passed. Then the sound came. Marching feet, the mechanical hum of dropships landing outside, the hiss of XL Zor voices coordinating. Torian crouched behind a fallen pillar, his muscles coiled like a predator waiting to strike. Rhea pressed her back against the stone beside him, gripping her rifle tight. Darnell was shaking. Torian whispered, "Hold your ground." They will break before we do. The first Excelsior stepped inside. Then another. Then a dozen. They never saw it coming. Torian triggered the first trap. A detonation of fire and stone ripped through the entryway, vaporizing the front line. The Excelsior screamed, stumbling into a crossfire of plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. Chaos erupted. Torian burst from cover, a blur of motion. His first strike shattered an alien skull. His second ripped a rifle from a dying hand, turning it on its former allies. Rhea's rifle cut down 3 more. Darnell screamed but held his ground, firing wildly. The Excelsior expected prey. Instead, they had entered hell. And at the center of it, Torian Graves, the last Titanborn, tore them apart. The massacre had begun. The ruins shook with the force of battle. Plasma fire blazed. Stone crumbled. Blood painted the floors. Torian was in his element. A Excelsior warrior lunged at him with an energy blade, hissing in rage. Torian sidestepped the strike and caught the alien's wrist mid-swing. With a savage twist, the Excelsior's bones snapped, and before it could scream, Torian drove the blade straight through its chest. He didn't stop moving. 2 more charge. Torian threw the corpse at them, sending them stumbling back. He closed the gap in an instant, grabbing one by the throat and slamming his skull into the wall with enough force to crater the stone. The other tried to flee. Torian wrenched the fallen blade free and hurled it. The weapon pierced through the Excelsior's spine. The remaining soldiers hesitated. They had numbers. They had superior weapons. But they weren't fighting humans. They were fighting something else. Rhea and Darnell kept up the assault from cover, raining hell with stolen plasma rifles. The trapped Excelsior were caught between the gunfire, and the Titanborn tearing through them. One of the warriors, their commander, bellowed a challenge. A hulking brute, clad in reinforced battle armor, stepped forward with a massive warhammer crackling with energy. Torian grinned. Finally, a real fight. The Excelsior commander swung. Torian dodged by inches, the hammer obliterating a section of the wall behind him. Dust and debris filled the air, but Torian surged forward, relentless. His fist slammed into the alien's ribs, the impact sending shockwaves through the brute's armor. Metal bent. Bones cracked. The Excelsior roared in pain but refused to fall. He lashed out. Torian caught the hammer's haft with one hand. For a moment, they locked eyes. Then Torian wrenched the weapon free and turned it against its wielder. One swing. One impact. The commander's head caved in like rotten fruit. The remaining Excelsior broke. Some fled. Others dropped their weapons in surrender. Torian let them, not out of mercy, but to send a message. He turned to the survivors, his voice cold and sharp as a blade. Run. Tell your Dominion what happened here. Tell them humanity has not forgotten, has not forgiven. The Excelsior scrambled out of the ruins, tripping over the corpses of their fallen. Rhea exhaled sharply, staring at Torian. You just let them go. Torian cracked his knuckles. They'll bring more. He looked up toward the ruins' exit, and I want them to. The Excelsior Dominion had ruled with fear for too long. Now that they would learn it for themselves. The Titanborn was not finished. He was just getting started. The ruins were silent now. The scent of scorched stone and blood filled the air. Smoke curled toward the ceiling from flickering plasma fires, casting long, jagged shadows across the chamber. Rhea and Darnell stood among the wreckage, bodies tense, rifles still gripped tight. The echoes of battle had faded, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on them like a storm cloud. Torian stood at the center of it all, motionless, listening, calculating, preparing. Then he spoke. They'll be back. Darnell swore under his breath. You think? Torian turned to him, eyes like hardened steel. I don't think. I know. Rhea wiped the sweat from her brow. They'll send everything they have this time. We should leave while we still can. Torian's gaze never wavered. No. Darnell threw up his hands. Are you insane? We barely survived this. If they send an entire war party, they won't stop. Torian's voice was calm, absolute, unshaken. You think running will change anything? The Exilzor don't let enemies escape. They don't forget, and they don't forgive. Darnell clenched his jaw but said nothing, because he knew Torian was right. Rhea exhaled. So what's the plan? Torian cracked his knuckles. We turn this place into a graveyard. Hashtag outside the ruins. Exilzor War Council. The Dominion strike force moved with lethal precision. Dozens of soldiers in full battle armor spread out across the rocky terrain, plasma rifles primed, their movements a perfectly synchronized advance. At the center of their ranks, a massive figure loomed. Overlord Fakir. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his armor gleaming with intricate war engravings, trophies from slaughtered species. His glowing eyes narrowed at the entrance to the ruins, nostrils flaring. Report, he growled. A scout kneeled. My lord, our forces were slaughtered. The human is inside. Fakir's mandibles clicked in disgust. One human did this. The scout hesitated. Not just any human. A Titanborn. The warlord's eyes flashed with recognition. Impossible. The Titanborn were wiped from history. The scout lowered his head. And yet, he is there. Fakir growled deep in his chest. Then he dies here. He turned to his warriors and raised a fist. We will not retreat. We will not falter. We will drown him in fire and fury. The Exilzor war machines powered up. Gunships roared overhead. Plasma cannons hummed with lethal energy. The full might of the Dominion had arrived. Inside the ruins, Torian watched the sky burn with enemy ships. And he smiled. Let's finish this. The ground trembled as the Exilzor war machines moved into position. Dropships hovered above the ruins, casting ominous shadows over the battlefield. Gunships shrieked through the air. Plasma cannons hummed, ready to turn the ruins into a smoking crater. Overlord Fakir stood at the front of his army, eyes locked on the entrance. End this. Exilzor forces surged forward. Inside the ruins, Torian watched them come. His breath was steady. His mind was clear. This was what he was made for. He turned to Rhea and Darnell. Find cover. Stay alive. Darnell swallowed hard. What about you? Torian's lips curled into a predator's grin. I'm not hiding. Then he moved. The ruins erupted. Rig explosives detonated in perfect sequence, collapsing corridors, trapping dozens of Exilzor in fiery death. Plasma traps ignited, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of fire and blood. And then, Torian charge, a blur of unstoppable fury. The first Exilzor never even saw the punch coming. Torian's fist caved in its skull like brittle glass. He ripped a rifle from a falling corpse and unleashed a storm of plasma fire, tearing through the incoming horde. A gunship roared overhead. Plasma cannons locked on him. Torian grabbed a fallen Exilzor's heavy weapon, shouldered it, and fired. A single shot. A perfect shot. The gunship exploded mid-air, flames and wreckage raining down upon the battlefield. Fakir snarled. Crush him. They tried. A massive Exilzor enforcer swung a power hammer. Torian caught the strike mid-swing. The alien's eyes widened in shock just as Torian wrenched the weapon free and drove it through its chest. Another warrior lunged. Torian ripped its arm off and used its own blade to gut it where it stood. The Exilzor began to falter. This was no human. This was a monster. Fakir roared in fury and charge. Torian met him head-on. The two collided like titans. Fakir's blades clashed against Torian's armored fists, plasma sparks flying. The warlord struck with inhuman strength, but Torian was stronger, faster, relentless. A brutal exchange of blows, crushing, bone-breaking impacts. Then, Torian saw his opening. He ducked under a strike and drove his fist straight through Fakir's chest. The warlord choked, mandibles twitching. Torian leaned in, voice like a death sentence. "Tell your dominion, humanity is done kneeling." Then, with a final twist of his arm, he tore Fakir's heart free. The remaining Xelzor fled in terror. The last Titanborn stood amidst the ruins, victorious. The war was not over, but humanity had just declared its return.